The fastest way to feel overwhelmed by a certification is to treat it like a giant, mysterious syllabus that you have to memorize line by line. And that is exactly what the CIPT blueprint can feel like at first glance. Today we're going to make it feel smaller, clearer, and honestly more human by treating it like a map that was built for one purpose: to describe what a privacy technologist actually does and what the exam expects you to recognize under pressure. When beginners see a blueprint, they often assume every line carries the same weight and that coverage is the goal. But what matters is understanding how the topics connect and how the exam is likely to test judgment, not trivia. You should come away from this with a mental model for what the blueprint is, how to read it, and how to identify the parts that drive the majority of points. Most importantly, you'll learn how to separate what's truly central from what is supporting detail, so your study time creates confidence instead of fatigue. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at Cyber.Author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. Start by thinking about the blueprint as a contract between the certification body and the candidates, not a textbook table of contents. It tells you the scope of the role the exam is measuring, the language the exam will use, and the boundaries of what you're responsible for knowing. A blueprint is also a fairness tool because it prevents the exam from drifting into random topics that are not related to privacy technology work. That said, a blueprint does not tell you how to study, and it does not tell you what the exam will ask word for word, so you should not read it like a script. Read it like a requirements document that describes capabilities, not like a list of facts. If you learn to recognize capabilities, you can handle new question wording, new examples, and unfamiliar scenarios because you understand the purpose behind the topic. A helpful mindset is to treat CIPT as a bridge between privacy concepts and the engineering choices that make those concepts real in products, systems, and processes. Many learners picture privacy as mostly legal, and they picture technology as mostly security, and they assume privacy technology is a narrow overlap. In reality, privacy technology is often about how data moves, how it is transformed, how decisions are made about it, and how people are kept informed and in control in a way that is practical. The blueprint will reflect that by mixing vocabulary from privacy, risk, governance, and technical design. You do not need to become a lawyer, and you do not need to become a penetration tester, but you do need to be comfortable translating between requirements and system behavior. When you see the blueprint through that lens, the topics stop looking random and start looking like the pieces of one job. Now let's clarify what truly matters means in an exam context, because it is not the same as what is most interesting. What truly matters is whatever shows up repeatedly as a pattern of thinking across the blueprint, because that is what the exam can test in many different ways. For example, if the blueprint repeatedly points you toward understanding personal data, processing, roles, and life cycle, then you should expect questions that require you to reason through those concepts, even if the question is dressed up in a different setting each time. The exam can ask about a mobile app today, a data warehouse tomorrow, and an internet-connected device the next day, but the scoring hinge is often the same. Do you know what data is being processed, why it is being processed, who is responsible, what risks exist, and what controls would reduce harm? High-yield learning is learning that generalizes across contexts. Low-yield learning is memorizing a corner case that never connects to anything else. One of the most common beginner mistakes is to over-focus on named frameworks and under-focus on the underlying reasoning they represent. Frameworks are important because they provide structure and shared language, but the exam is not usually asking you to recite framework labels as if they are magic words. Instead, you'll often be asked to choose the best action, the best control category, or the best next step, and frameworks are a way to organize that decision. If you treat frameworks as a set of drawers in a filing cabinet, the goal is not to memorize the drawer names, but to know what kind of thing goes in each drawer and why. When you read the blueprint, notice where it implies decision-making, prioritization, trade-offs, and sequencing. Those are the clues that the exam cares about applied understanding, not just definitions. This is also why beginners benefit from learning concepts in pairs, like notice plus choice or minimization plus purpose limitation, because the exam loves relationships. Another way to crack a blueprint is to identify the verbs, not just the nouns. Nouns are the topics, like data inventory, de-identification, consent, incident response, and third-party risk. Verbs are what the role does with those topics, like assess, document, align, monitor, respond, design, and validate. Verbs tell you whether you need recognition-level knowledge or working-level reasoning. If the blueprint implies you must evaluate and choose among options, you need more than a definition, because you must know what good looks like and what bad looks like. If the blueprint implies you must communicate and coordinate, then you need to understand roles, responsibilities, and the flow of work, not just the technology itself. You can study a noun forever and still freeze on a question if you have not practiced the verb. So when you scan each blueprint area, ask yourself what action a privacy technologist is supposed to take there. It also helps to separate the blueprint into a few mental buckets that you keep returning to, because those buckets become your exam instincts. One bucket is data lifecycle thinking, meaning what data is collected, where it goes, how it changes, who accesses it, how long it stays, and how it is deleted or archived. Another bucket is governance and accountability thinking, meaning who owns decisions, who implements controls, who approves exceptions, and how proof is maintained. Another bucket is risk thinking, meaning what could go wrong, how likely it is, how harmful it would be, and what controls reduce either likelihood or impact. Another bucket is user trust thinking, meaning what people are told, what choices they have, how those choices are respected, and how the experience avoids manipulation and confusion. Most blueprint items can be placed into one of these buckets, and many sit in two at the same time, which is exactly why the exam feels integrated rather than segmented. If you can place a topic into a bucket, you can usually predict what kind of question the exam can generate from it. Because CIPT is about privacy and technology, it's also worth understanding what the exam is not trying to do. It is not trying to test you on deep implementation detail, like how to configure a database or tune a logging system. It is also not trying to test you on obscure legal citations or country-by-country regulatory trivia. The exam wants you to recognize common privacy obligations and translate them into engineering and operational choices. That means you should prioritize understanding how requirements become system features and process steps, and how those choices affect risk and user expectations. When you see a blueprint point that mentions a regulatory concept, ask yourself what a system would need to do differently because of that concept. When you see a point that mentions a control, ask yourself what it protects against and what evidence would show it is working. This keeps you in the exam center lane. Let's talk about waiting without turning this into guesswork, because people love to chase rumors about what is most tested. You do not need secret knowledge to study smartly, because the blueprint itself signals weight through breadth, frequency of concepts, and how foundational an idea is to other ideas. If a concept is a prerequisite for understanding many other blueprint areas, it is high yield even if it is not glamorous. For example, if you do not understand the difference between identifying data and classifying data, you will struggle with inventories, retention, access controls, disclosures, and incident response, because classification drives decisions everywhere. If you do not understand what a processing purpose is, then minimization and lawful basis discussions become fuzzy, and you start guessing instead of reasoning. Foundations are tested indirectly across many questions, so mastering them pays multiple times. You can spot foundations by looking for terms that appear repeatedly in different parts of the blueprint. A practical trick is to convert the blueprint into a set of recurring question shapes rather than a list of topics. One common shape is identification: what data is involved, who is the subject, and what is the system doing. Another shape is responsibility: who is accountable, who executes, and who must be consulted or informed. Another shape is control selection: given a risk, which control reduces it most appropriately without overreaching. Another shape is sequencing: what should happen first, what must be documented before implementation, and what needs monitoring after deployment. Another shape is evaluation: which option is the best balance of privacy protection, user expectations, and business need. The blueprint might not say question shapes, but it implies them through the types of capabilities it describes. When you study with question shapes in mind, you stop being surprised by the exam because you recognize the pattern even when the story changes. Misconceptions are also part of what truly matters, because wrong assumptions create predictable wrong answers. A classic misconception is that privacy is the same as security, which causes learners to overselect security-heavy answers that do not address privacy requirements like transparency, choice, and purpose. Another misconception is that compliance equals privacy, which causes learners to pick answers that focus only on meeting a rule rather than reducing harm and honoring user expectations. Another misconception is that de-identification is a universal escape hatch, which leads to overly confident assumptions about what can be shared or kept indefinitely. Another misconception is that privacy is only a policy problem, which causes learners to ignore the reality that design decisions and data flows can defeat even perfect policies. The blueprint is full of areas where these misconceptions can be tested, because the role of a privacy technologist is to avoid exactly these mistakes in real organizations. It's also important to recognize that the blueprint rewards clarity of language, because privacy work is full of terms that sound similar but mean different things. For beginners, terms like anonymization and pseudonymization can blur together, and so can concepts like consent and notice, or controller and processor, or retention and archival. The exam often tests your ability to distinguish these concepts in context, not in isolation. That means when you study a term, you should always attach it to an outcome, like what changes in a system or process when you choose one approach over another. You should also attach it to a risk, like what can still go wrong even if you apply the concept. That combination of meaning plus consequence makes the knowledge stick and makes exam choices feel logical instead of memorized. Since CIPT is technology-oriented, the blueprint also expects you to understand how organizations turn intentions into repeatable operations. Beginners sometimes imagine that privacy is a one-time design review and then the system is fine forever. Real privacy operations are ongoing because systems evolve, data sources change, vendors come and go, and new uses appear for existing data. So the blueprint will include ideas like monitoring, auditing, incident response, third-party management, and documentation. What matters here is not the exact format of a document or the name of a meeting, but the reason these activities exist: to detect drift, manage changes, and prove accountability. The exam can ask you what to do when something changes, what evidence you should have, or what process should catch a problem early. If you connect operations to drift and accountability, the blueprint starts to read like a story about keeping a promise over time. Finally, cracking the blueprint means turning it into a study compass that tells you where to invest attention every time you learn something new. When you encounter a concept, ask which bucket it belongs to, which question shape it supports, and which misconceptions it corrects. If you can answer those three things, you have converted a topic from isolated knowledge into usable exam skill. Over time, you will notice that certain themes keep showing up, like data lifecycle, roles and responsibilities, risk reasoning, transparency and trust, and practical translation from requirement to system behavior. Those themes are what truly matters because they are reusable, testable, and central to the identity of the CIPT role. When you study the blueprint with those themes in mind, you are not just memorizing. You are building the kind of thinking the exam is designed to reward.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit BareMetalCyber.com.